Well, we finished up last week. We didn't finish lesson 31. So we're going to go ahead and complete that and go right into lesson 32. So by the time we're done tonight, we will most likely have gone through Mark 13, verse 37. So for tonight, we're going to officially call this lesson 32, which is Mark 13, 24 through 37, knowing that we've got to swing back and pick up. I believe we were talking about the abomination of desolation last week, and we finished up with Preston talking about that there could be 3 or 4 different events of that. You talked about a couple of different emperors as well as General Titus, and we had talked about the Zealots early on, 68 BC or AD. And so we kind of looked at a lot of those different things. But where we're going to launch into next was, and we can pick up on some of that. You guys make comments. You can kind of swing back through and pick some of that up if you want. We had talked about the fact that in verse 14 it says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought to, let him that readeth understand. Oh, I'm in King James. Hang on a second. I don't want to do readeth. There we go. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not to, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. It's kind of where we were basically going last week. Let him who is on the housetop not go down into the house, nor enter to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, and pray that your flight may not be in winter. For in those days there will be tribulation such as has not been seen since the beginning of creation, which God created until this time, nor ever shall be. And unless the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he chose, he shortened the days. That if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or look, he is there, do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and show signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. But take heed, see, I have told you all things beforehand. So that kind of gets us to the end of what is a lesson 31, and then it'll kind of continue to speak into lesson 32. But I want to finish where we were last week. And so if you still have 31's notes, we talked about that the command is to flee right away to the wilderness. Don't go back inside. Leave your possessions. Get out of the city. Now, run. And so let me just move a little further down, and then I'm going to pause here right after I make these comments. Verses 19 and 20, depending on which period we're looking at, right? Whether we're talking about a near-term fulfillment with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, or whether we're looking out into the far future, past even us, depending on how you look at it, it could be hyperbole, right? Because he's speaking about it in a pretty profound way, but probably the destruction of Jerusalem as devastating as it was for the people, would you really want to say that that was the worst that had ever been seen or ever would be seen? You know, that seems kind of hyperbolic in its own way. Or if you're looking out at something in the distant future, that would be more of the destruction of the world, then of course that'd be more an accurate description. So it really depends on the perspective and the time that Jesus is describing here. And certainly it could be, as we said last week, multiples. So let me pause there. And we kind of were starting down this path last week. So kind of anybody have a take on this or questions about it or what your position is kind of thing? And again, like last week, I don't want to get us too far off into all over the Bible, but this could be instructive. So floor's open.
So Trent's chewing, so this is a good time for me to throw this out. I'm in your ball game where I think we're looking at double, if not maybe multiple prophetic occasions.
Okay, what would so You say double, if not multiple. So kind of near
So
term, right? Near term for sure, right? Yeah.
yeah, 78, 66 through 70 AD. Yes. But then there's way too much that, and I don't believe that what we're saying is hyperbolic of what's going to happen when the Son of Man returns. That is going to be calamitous and tumultuous for everyone. And that hasn't happened yet.
That is correct. And certainly, yeah, that's we're gonna after we go through this little section about the false prophets, which really is very important to this, we're gonna be looking right there at the day of the Lord. So pretty substantial for what you're saying. So okay, good, good. Other thoughts? Trent is chewing, so it's a good time to jump in. It's too fun.
Well, I'll still stand on the idea that majority of this discourse is addressed to Israel as covenant people of Israel, and still having a place for an extended period of time that's not necessarily the same thing as the covenant to the church. So it's kind of, there's some what I think are little blurred lines about which part goes with which part.
Mhm.
You know, if you're thinking, oh well, the abomination that causes desolation is talking about the very beginning of this whole discourse where the temple is going to be destroyed, it seems strange to me that he spent a whole lot of time talking about, look, it's going to get destroyed, and then you're going to have this whole period of things that look like the end, and they're not the end. There's just going to be a long period this time.
Yeah.
You personally are going to have a whole lot of just personal difficulty, persecutions that you're not used to. It's times that what you would think of as Jewish society under the law and all the traditions that are built around it doesn't apply anymore. You know, in all of those descriptions of how you'll be treated in front of the synagogue and in front of governors. That's not okay in Jewish society, and it sounds like this is just going to how it's going to get turned. So what I hear is, personally, is more the abomination of desolation is setting up something similar to what a lot of more Orthodox Judaism looks forward to as a third temple, as part of their eschatological hope, right? And yes, this leads into a lot of Zionism, and I'm not going to do any of that, but the idea being he's saying, look, the temple that you're looking at is going to get destroyed, and then there's going to be all this time. And then there's going to be an occasion where, yet again, an abomination that causes desolation, but this time, the big one, will be in a place that it doesn't belong, namely the temple courtyard. Well, if it's already been destroyed,
It's got to be a different temple.
Got to be a different temple. So where do these intersect? Well, we have all of the New Testament as Christians that we've kept. That includes even to Revelation that gets vivid about this and seems to call back to Daniel and Isaiah and Ezekiel and all the others. If that third temple of Judaism comes to fruition via a religious fervor that he seems to be talking about with false prophets and false messiahs, and overturned Jewish societal norms from the previous paragraph, you could almost say that the temple itself and those who build it are that abomination causing desolation. They are the somewhere in that milieu becomes the man of sin who will appear that he talks about later. And in that regard, this whole thing seems to go more towards the next part, this when you see the Son of Man returning, rather than being attached so much to what came before, as far as a historical location.
It's interesting that you see it. There's a lot of elements of what you shared there that fit in with a lot of things I've read and heard, and again, it depends a lot on tradition, and I mean as in one's
right.
Denominational tradition. But yet you see the tribunals and that many, including myself, would see as the persecution of the church as being possibly the persecution of Israel.
It, because of where you stand depends on where you sit.
Well, I get that, but I could see going either way because
Right.
he's
Well,
talking to Jewish people who are his disciples, who are going to be the church.
at the time, there wasn't a big
disciples.
difference.
But I get that. But I'm saying it depends on whether you're looking at their Jewishness or you're looking at their Christianity, right? So it could go really, it could kind of cut either way, and we're not going to know.
From the
Until
hindsight
the
of
end.
2,000 years of Christianity.
Sure, I get that. But again, you're right. He was speaking to Jewish people who were his followers. And so you and I know that it took a generation and they were doing this,
Make the split.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. So,
So
I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying it's an interesting take.
Yeah, I'm suggesting that it's important to note that from the perspective when he said it, not that he wouldn't have known everything that was going to happen, but for the relevance of what he was trying to teach them and maybe the ideal version that he was trying to promote, that would have made sense to them without the benefit of our hindsight. There's not that big of a distinction between Jewish and Christian. It's intended to be kind of a part and parcel. And so the rebellious part of Judaism, institutional Judaism at this point, which Jesus has just decried in the 7 woes of Pharisees and all that kind of stuff. He's trying to say, look, if you're going to be the true Israel, not as a replacement theology thing, just as a, this is a new way of Judaism. There's a continuity here, but with better understanding, new mystery revealed, all that stuff. He's saying a lot of the institutional Judaism that's going wayward, that will still exist from our perspective, and whether you take 500 years of Christianity, 1,000 or 1,500 or now 2,000, we reinterpret that and have reinterpreted that in many different ways that would not have made a whole lot of sense to them at that time.
Yeah, and I get you, but I think there's another area, and I'm going to kind of start steering back in because we're going to go way off in the weeds. I think we also have to look at the reality that when did Mark write this? Okay, and by the time Mark wrote this, they were already starting to experience this not as Jews but as Christians.
Sure.
So we have to kind of factor that into it as well.
And he wrote to Gentile Christians trying to understand.
Indeed,
this.
absolutely. But the church had already. It didn't take long for these guys. Obviously, Luke was writing about it. Within the first generation. They were dealing with it. So, I say it's an interesting tack. I don't disagree. I just say I can see it either way. So that's kind of my thought on that. Anybody else got thoughts or questions? I don't want to run off from you guys.
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts about this, but I'm not really going to weigh in a whole lot because it's going to take us to Revelation, and we're not studying Revelation. So,
All right.
So I'm content to chime in when, again, I see Trent chewing, and I can throw something out there to have us consider. Yeah, see, right, like that.
Okay. Well done. Well done. There's so many fine points to your scholarship, Preston. It's pretty amazing. So, including watching the eating habits of your colleagues. It's interesting that early on in the discourse, he had talked about the false messiahs, right? And so then he comes back in 21, 22, 23, or 21, 22 really, and he brings them up again. And I think it's important that we understand that he's not repeating the same caution before. Typically, the way the scholars look at this is that these are directly connected to the fact that he said, you need to get out of town. You need to get away. And so these people that are being mentioned in 21, 22 are almost, if you will, like we saw the false prophets in the Old Testament in Jeremiah's day, where they were saying, "Oh, they're not going to they're not going to destroy us. The Lord is going to protect Israel." And the true prophets, the Jeremiahs were saying, you're wrong. You're wrong. The judgment is coming on Israel. And so it's a similar kind of mechanic that's going on here, that Jesus is saying to these people, you need to, don't pick up your clothes, don't go back in the house, get out now when you see this coming. And these false prophets are going, no, we're okay, we're good, stay here. And so it's a very direct caution to not listen to those who are preaching error, who are teaching error. I think there's a bigger lesson for us as followers of Christ. If the Lord is telling you to move, if somebody's coming along and saying, wait a minute, let's check this out, you may need to check them out, but on the way out the door, quite frankly. Does that kind of make sense? Because it's a very pointed caution. It's situational at this point. It's not that they're necessary. It's not just that they're preaching falsely. They're doing it in a way that's going to hurt these people who would stick around to hear what they've got to say, instead of just getting out before the destruction. So, but he makes the point, and depending on who do you want the elect to be, what Trent's talking about, the elect could be Israel, the elect could be the church, it could be both. But in my sense, because I tend to look at it more as the church, even these believers are going to be deceived by these imposters, and so they're going to get chewed up and spit out. He says, so take heed. I've told you this is going to happen. So don't be caught up in that. I wanted to ask this question last week, and I just left it alone because I knew we were out of time. So I'm going to ask it now, and you're welcome to snipe as much as you want to about this. But I asked the question, what is the real danger of focusing on end times and end times events? And I said last week, I probably could have put the phrase, what is the danger of focusing too much on end time events and timetables? Maybe you don't even think there is a danger to that. But what do you think? If you're spending so much time caught up in that, is there a pitfall to that? And if so, what is it? And I'm going to refresh you just so you kind of can get a sense of where my question comes from. If you recall last week, I made the statement that the Olivet Discourse is, and we discussed this, that it's less about getting caught up in the minutiae of the details, and it's more about being watchful and cautious and obedient. That was the point that Jesus was trying to make in this discourse. So if you know that that's the baseline, to be cautious and watchful and obedient, then what can be the danger if you're focusing too much on the events themselves? And that means for us today. Was that leading enough?
Well, I know a little bit story time here, but I know when I've looked into a new church in different places that I've lived, whether it's around here or visiting family in Austin, and hey, let's all go on Sunday. Whenever and those are actual examples to think of, but it's an over and over thing. When the first time I'd visit a church or sample a church, or I even am doing research ahead of time to see, hey, what can I look forward to? And I see this week, the end times, exclamation mark, and maybe a few more. The one key got stuck, Honestly, I go running. I mean, I'll be polite if I'm there in person. I'll sit through. I'll smile. I'll probably agree with most of what's being said, or understand that theologically, yeah, your foundation is there, and but it scares the daylights out of me that this is what we get excited about. Because, to your question, one, you miss a lot of what we're doing here in the meantime. You know, the watchful lookout. He goes to a parable about the watchman and the servants in the house, among many parables about servants in the house while the master is away. And if you're not doing that because you're over here doing your multiplication tables, you're not doing the Christian life because you're sitting in the Christian ejection seat.
Christian ejection seat. You must have seen Top Gun Maverick this week again or something. I like that phrase.
Work with it every day.
Right on, brother. That's true. You do. Other thoughts? Agree with Trent? Disagree?
Trent's talking about, and you know, again, I love when he does this and in the way that he does, and he builds it up, leading it to the Christian ejection seat, because you know what he's really talking about, even though the funny's at the end there, he's talking about the get out of jail free card that
Right.
Christians anticipate and have been using scripture incorrectly, at least over the past almost 100 and some odd years, about the Lord, the rapture taking us out of stuff.
The great harpazo.
Yes, sir. As opposed to John 17, which is the Lord not taking us out, but keeping us through it and unifying us. So I get excited when Trent does that, because recognizing the great Christian ejection seat, that's what it is that he's sitting in when he's listening to folks talk about the end times, because at the end of the message, the bow is, well, you're not going to be here. You don't really have to worry about it. And that's not being on watch or being on task.
All right. I'm going to comment on that in a minute or two, but the great harpazo.
Don't forget to take care of the here and now. The here and now, which you're in, before the future or the ejection seat.
That's it. I mean, that's the whole thing Jesus was getting at. What are you doing now?
Well, all
You know, Chris-
something.
Oh, sorry, Trent.
No, yours is a direct comment.
You know, Chris, when you say that, it's almost the difference, and this is not a generational insult, but I think some of us will appreciate this. The difference of what you just said is almost the difference in folks who take the selfie and folks who are experiencing the moment. Because sometimes, although you have treasures from the selfies you took, you weren't really experiencing or in the moment, because your focus was capturing the moment as opposed to being a part of the moment.
I'm sorry, what's a selfie?
Trent, you had something?
Well, another side of all this, the danger of it is honestly a lot of our denominationalism over the centuries has been driven by eschatology. A lot of our political movements, not just our current humongous divide that we've got on our hands right now, but all of them through Christian history, honestly derive from various eschatological interpretations. I mean, the bulk of Christian history was the Catholic interpretation that all of this is already done and gone, and what you're seeing with the church is the so-called millennial reign. Like, that's the kingdom the church is in. And we're just living through it, and it's mostly metaphorical anyway, so let's just listen to whatever the church says.
All right, now you're getting into the danger area. I'm gonna rein you back in on this one.
Right, and that's all there is to say about that. But then a lot of the retaliations or, hey, wait a minute, that have come up since then have sometimes been overshoots in other directions but generally because there's too much of an attachment to a then current political reality, with the assumption that that was the means to manifest eschatology in one way or another, especially in someone's specific preferred way. And that becomes so dangerous because whether we're trying to make it so that Jesus can come back, as we see on half of
Yeah.
American politics, or
Yeah.
make it so that we don't hurt so bad until Jesus comes back, as we see on the other half of our politics right now.
We know that
We missed the boat altogether.
the challenge is that wherever you fall on this, is that there's such a tendency to want to become entirely absorbed with one's own eschatology, and you get to a point like, well, I'll say the name, like John Hagee, and you've got the whole platform of your church covered with big diagrams that go across there, speaking in such authoritative and, may I say, inflexible ways that my interpretation of scriptural prophecy is the only one that works. And you're right, you get to a point where when that that level of, I'll use the word certainty, that your view is right, occurs, then you're right. There's not a lot of room there to recognize the fact that, and you talked earlier about, we're looking at things from a 2000, year later reality. You don't have to always go that far. I mean, you read the New Testament and you see the things that were fulfilled from the Old Testament, and you go, now that probably would have surprised some people because it didn't turn out the way that one would have thought. I mean, the one that I always go to is the fact that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but he wasn't from Bethlehem. And it messed people up, because what good thing could come from Nazareth? And, what a neat way for God to fulfill the prophetic pronouncement and yet place Jesus in a living situation that had a built-in dislike, distrust, whatever you want to call it, because he was from Hicktown, Nazareth, and so if even the people in the Old Testament seeing the New Testament, seeing the Old Testament prophecies, were surprised by them, how is it we think that all this far out in the mist stuff is necessarily going to happen exactly the way that the Left Behind series put it together, which I know Preston and I have hooted over that several times. And but don't you think, and this is why I asked the question, and I guess I'm commenting now, it almost becomes, maybe not quite the right word, but it almost becomes salacious at times that people are just drooling over this stuff. It's like they're watching some telenovela or something. I mean, they try to turn it into a primetime drama almost, which is where Chris was, right? They're more concerned about that thing in the future instead of where am I today. And Trent, I'm glad to hear you say you're not going to hang out in a church that makes that their calling card. I've said often, when we get the other 65 books right, then we can spend some time in Revelation. But then I'm a little silly about that. I know Preston's taught the Revelation before, but it certainly wasn't. Yeah, it certainly wasn't though, because you had people just clawing at you to do it. You were trying to give some education on the matter, not stir people. Other thoughts?
So thanks for saying that, because the one time I taught it, actually, it's funny that you use the term salacious. When I was at a burgeoning mega church, prior to you and me meeting, I was asked to do an evening study for Sunday. and I happened on the course of Revelation, and and I'm one of those idiots that from the time I understood kind of Revelation, and my brother will tell you this, I probably me and another guy we had set up charts. We had done this. We had itemized the whole thing. We knew exactly when Jesus was going to come, and this, unfortunately, I would date myself by telling you when we set these charts up, but certainly depending on the generation definition, and then Israel becoming a nation and Israel capturing the Golan Heights, we had different variations based on all of that. So when the LaHaye Jenkins book first came out, I was on board with that. And that tells you, study to show yourself approved. Because I since went back and have restudied all of the stuff that I thought and realized I was wrong in a lot of areas. Because I was definitely on board when LaHaye and Jenkins came out with their stuff. I felt like they were endorsing all the work I had done until I went back and I studied. So it's to say that when I did the first Revelation training, it was more in line with LaHaye and Jenkins. And the bigger reason I'm telling you this is because it was a Sunday night class when people typically kind of don't come back to church. And the class started with about 30 people. About 5-6 lessons in, there were 110 people, including the pastor, in the church, because it was one of those that people were hungry enough that they wanted to know all the salacious details and what did this thing mean? What did that portend? What year was this going to be? And they were more hungry about that than they were about serving the Lord. And that's kind of what Chris's point was. And so we have, and it is politics. It is religion. It's denominations sometimes that love this date game so much, the dates, the time so much, that they're not being good watchmen and they're not being good servants. So I'm guilty of helping to perpetuate that, but I think I got it right the second time when I fixed and apologized for all my initial mistakes with Revelation.
That's such an interesting story, though, and as an account that you shared, is that the word of mouth, oh, titter, 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 right, and people wanting to see that. Because they are kind of seated, edge of your seat type experiences that they're having, and then when, and again, I've liked some of Hagee's preaching and teaching, but when he starts, getting into his 4 blood moons and all that kind of stuff, and it's like, and wanting to tie, well, yeah, I'll put a bow on this part for me, just this simply. Since I've been a pastor, regardless of which president is in power or which party is in power, I've gotten numerous emails for whichever president it was saying, this president is the Antichrist. I'm convinced. Here are the scriptures that tell you that. It's like, people, come on. The time that you're burning, trying to connect all the current events. Do you guys remember when we invaded Iraq? Oh my gosh. I remember sitting in a sermon, Christine was with me, sitting in a sermon that this was the prophetic fulfillment. This was the beginning of the end. We just get ready. The trumpet's going to sound soon when we invaded Iraq with Schwarzkopf back in, was that 1991? It's like, I know scripture tells us, that Jesus is saying here, you should be able to see the signs. He talks about that. But us trying to ingratiate America into all of the future stuff it's a little sketchy in and of itself. And, again, trying to identify the Antichrist, to identify, the armies invading and Gog and Magog and all this other kind of stuff. It seems like the energy that people put into it, what you guys are saying, the energy that they're putting into it could be telling somebody about Jesus. And this is where Preston started. And I've heard people my entire life say, well, even so, come quickly, Lord. And my comment always is, well, If he does, there's a lot of people going to hell, and because they're going to get sucked up into the wrath. So I just don't think we need to be in a hurry to say. But isn't it kind of our culture today? How many movies have been produced in the last 10, 15 years about the destruction of the world? And they're blockbusters, and people go to them in the droves, right? I mean, how many? So could it be that the culture is driving the study instead of the other way around? Arnold as the Antichrist being promoted from the governor of California. Wow. Schwarzenegger as the Antichrist. Okay. Interesting.
He was German, and he's from the Antichrist is going to be from Europe.
Okay, so the Nikolai Carpathia type thing. Okay. I'm probably going to offend people that watch this because I'm kind of dogging on. I read a lot of those Left Behind books, by the way. I thought they were interesting, but it started to get a little too tidy for me. So, enough said. Well, with that, let's talk about the Son of Man coming into power. What do you say? Kind of turn a corner a little bit here. He says in verse 24, but in those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars of heaven will fall and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send his angels and gather together his elect from the four winds, from the farthest part of the earth to the farthest part of heaven. And so, I think in the NIV they've got this structured like it's poetry and it's quoting, and even in well, no, not in the New King James. It's quotes, but it's because Jesus is speaking. Typically, yeah, that structure there, right? Yeah, it's kind of like poetry.
NASB, and then the Greek that it's from.
Yeah,
is kind of poetically framed.
Okay. The thing that it's
At
not
least in this version of it.
right. That's what the NIV had as well. It's important that we recognize though that this isn't a straight quote of any one verse of Scripture. Most of the different Bibles I picked up referred typically to Isaiah 13:10 and 34:4, I think, were the two that it kind of pointed at. But I just pulled a few out here: Ezekiel 32:7 and 8, and then you can see them on the sheet there: Joel, Amos, Zephaniah, where there were passages that had this sort of imagery in there, pretty close in lockstep going along. So these could either prophesy specific national or general judgment. What do I mean by that? Some of these passages I've got listed, it'll be speaking to Egypt, for example, specifically to a judgment about Egypt. Of course, Egypt's one of those ones that can mean more than just Egypt, just like Babylon means more than just that town. But in some of these passages, it's more general, as in God's judgment against humanity. So they kind of go both ways, but that same imagery of the sky darkened and the stars falling, different aspects of that you see. So there's a commonality to that. And I just made mention of the fact that, when we see the other Son of Man passages in Mark, they're more like, well, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. The Son of Man has been up until this point more of the humble servant picture, as opposed to now we see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And so he is definitely gone from that lowly, because now he's coming back. This is his second advent, coming back in power. And this section specifically links us to Daniel 7:13 and 14, where he saw one coming like the Son of Man. And I don't have that in front of me right now. But what's interesting about that just operating off my tablet here. As it says, I was watching in the night visions, this is Daniel 7:13 and 14. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And to him was given, and by the way, people said, well, it's not exactly the same. It's like, well, you got to read 14. You got to read 14 because this makes it all make sense. Because it says, then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Okay, and so now he's been given the authority by God the Father to now go gather the elect. He's coming in power now to the earth, and so that's kind of the picture that's there. And you know, the gathering of the elect is one of those themes that's in the Old Testament quite a bit as well. So, you know, for any kind of Trent's point from earlier, to any Jewish listener, these themes are all going to make sense. It's all going to make sense in their eschatology, for what it's worth. So I got a question here, but comments from you guys, questions from you guys before I kind of put my question out there. I kind of gave mine away kind of already.
Well, if you don't mind, I might get slightly weird for a second.
What if I tell you I might?
I'll stop.
Okay, get weird, but not too weird.
Okay, so this is not unbiblical by any stretch, but I'll get to why in a second. This first part, the poetic part about the sun being darkened and the moon not giving its light, the stars falling from heaven. I think that it's very, very likely that it's wrong to read this astronomically.
You think it's
Scientific.
figurative?
Figurative is it's a way to say it, and it has to do with ancient and classical cosmology. And the best illustration I can give in modern pop culture is The Truman Show.
Wow.
So, Jim Carrey movie, The Truman Show, he lives in this little world and everything is just curated with a big dome over the top, and the whole thing is a movie studio in the movie.
Right.
But, you know, the sun and moon are projected onto the dome over him, and the control room is always either where the sun or the moon is that the director is sitting in, and the whole film crew and all that stuff.
Yep, they cue the sun every morning, it comes up and everything goes. Yeah.
Right. So I'm not sure that the writers of The Truman Show did this accidentally, because this is how ancient, not just Jewish, but including Jewish cosmology went, was that we lived on Earth, and it can be round or flat or whatever. But the firmament that they always talk about is like a dome that keeps us away from heaven. And everything we see that's in the heavens is up there. So where we say figurative as an understanding of these terms, sun, moon, stars, remember in the Old Testament, stars is often a synonym for sons of God or angels in a few places. And a lot of this goes more into Jewish tradition rather than what's in Old Testament scripture. But sun and moon, and this is something that carried on into medieval times. You can read it in Dante even. Sun and moon are not gods themselves, but visible representations of Jesus and Holy Spirit, or components of God to the Jewish mind.
Okay.
Like I said, getting weird, and I'm not going to go like too deep into that.
Yeah,
but
please don't. You're going to lose me.
the idea being that instead of us looking for signs in the sky, oh, well, that's a solar eclipse, and then immediately after it's a lunar eclipse, and then a meteor shower. And so we just have to look up all the prediction tables from all of the orbits and all the stuff. And we can just say, well, here are the clusters, and it should be around then, which people have done.
Yep.
What I'm getting at is the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. Kind of as a hearkening back to the whole creation account of the greater light and the lesser light. This whole period, going back to the previous section and including this, is a major undoing of creation with all of the devastation that sin has wrought on it in order to redo it right again. The stars falling from the sky is not just angels coming down, it's the whole firmament evaporating, basically. It's a coming together again in the long run of heaven and earth to a unified state.
Well, that was a lot to say that there's going to be a major change in our universe, and I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think what you're trying to keep us away from is more the signs of the signs of the times kind of stuff.
Right.
Um,
But
you know,
to appreciate that they had a what we would think of as an astrological understanding of what they look up at in the night sky.
See, I
Yeah.
never saw it. I never saw it that way though. I've always seen this as this is not some. Well, I'll put it this way: it's not normal. I'll just leave it at that. This is not normal. This is the end of time. So I hear where you're coming from, though, from the standpoint of can you look at it from the imagery of the Old Testament as well, right?
I
Okay.
just think that there's a stronger allusion, not an outright statement, but just a allusion to a lot of the Jewish apocalyptic idea that goes with some of the prophecies of, say, Daniel, that this is a very, very figurative and florid way of talking about the coming of the day of the Lord.
Yeah.
Here he comes to the battlefield.
See, I'm not so
Here he
willing
comes with
though.
his host.
I'm not so willing, and maybe it's just because I'm not studied enough in it. I guess I read too much in the commentaries where they want to go back and they want to derive meaning from extra biblical sources, from non-biblical sources, and I'm a little cautious about that because it's theological, but it's not inspired. It's theological, but it's not necessarily as informed as it could be. I mean, the same reason that we pitch apocryphal and those sorts of books. So it could inform us of their religious milieu, but it may not,
What I'm getting
you
at.
know. Right. Yeah. God's gonna do it God's way, not our way. So,
Right.
but that's kind of where you are too, right?
Yep.
Okay. Other thoughts? You and I are agreeing. We're getting there, Trent. I don't know how, but somehow we're
Violent agreement.
violent agreement. There you go. I'll buy that. So, guys, my question is: they've had all these Son of God conversations recently, in the 3 years they were together, and that those Son of God conversations were coming more rapidly the last few months, and they typically centered on what? His crucifixion and his death and his burial and his resurrection and all those sorts of things. So how do you think the disciples are going to react to this very different representation of Jesus? I think of the Son of Man. I think what Trent's saying is and I guess I've been saying it too, is they've got all these passages that talk about this day of the Lord thing, but all of a sudden he's associating himself with the day of the Lord. And so how do you think they reacted to that? Or did they? And yes, this falls into the conjecture range.
I think they thought finally we're getting to the good part.
Some heads are going to roll.
So Trent already answered this one, if not last week, a couple weeks ago. I'm gonna vote in on the side of they don't get it, and and
I did
and
say
let
that.
me let me lay evidence for my proof. Um, this is this is the final discussion, part one. They're going to need the final discussion, part two, in the upper room, and they're still not going to get it until Acts chapter 2. So they're struggling with this now, and I'm gonna dovetail where Trent is. They love hearing this stuff, especially Simon the Zealot. He's grooving hard on this, but they don't get it because Jesus the servant has now become Jesus the potentate. They don't get it. And when Jesus has the upper room discussion with them, you can tell by the commentary they don't understand what's going on. All they are is afraid, more so during that upper room situation, and that fear plays itself out in the Garden of Gethsemane when the guards come. So they're not going to get it for some time. I'm comfortable that they don't get it because I don't think us church people today get it. If we did, we'd spend less time on the agenda that's not the Lord's, and we'd spend more time being good workmen.
Okay. It's kind of a biting critique, but I think you're dead on as far as our generation, where we are right now.
I mean, he does immediately go into several different attempts to reel them back in. Immediately.
You know, that's an interesting take, right? Because he's been building to this. He's been building to this. He's been building to it, and then it basically gets in our English Bible 4 verses of scripture, and then, like you say, it's like now that you know that, let's go back to the theme. Let's go back to the theme. And why are you shaking your head? He does.
No, I'm agreeing with you by shaking my head because their minds have been blown. They now need to think about what they're going to eat and what they're going to drink because what they just heard, it's not registering.
Well, it's kind of interesting you mentioned the upper room because he prays all this stuff and he teaches them and they're still fighting over who's the greatest, right? I mean, it's of course I know that's kind of the front end of that whole discussion, but really did miss a lot of it. I keep thinking, okay, I have to remember they didn't have they hadn't been baptized with the Holy Spirit yet, so they're still out there a bit. So part of the reeling in, to use that, is what he says next about the fig tree. He goes back to the fig tree again. You guys remember we were dealing with the fig tree for a couple of different events earlier on as they were getting ready to, well, as the week started, they were dealing with the fig tree. So give me a second. I got to get back to my 28. So we've got our Bibles and got these headings and headings and headings and stuff, but this is just a continual flow of information to these guys. So he's telling them about the Son of Man coming in power and gathering his angels and gathering his elect from the four winds. This is why I didn't want to go too far into eschatology because that statement in and of itself can really scramble the whole. So what happens to the church kind of thing. Yeah, that little bit right there. Leave it alone. Okay. I was going to make this statement. People hang a lot of their theology on one or two verses of scripture. It gets pretty tenuous at times, where they hang a large part of their theology when there's sometimes a preponderance of other verses that may not always contradict, but they certainly should make one take pause at the one or two verses that they hang their hat on. And kind of goes back to what Trent said earlier about how we battle over theology. That's not just end times, by the way. It's just a lot of people's theology.
I can agree that this is a nice maple tree, but look at the oak forest that it's standing in.
Exactly. That's it. So he says, now learn this parable from not the oak or the maple, but the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and put forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see these things happening, know that it is near at the doors. Surely I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. And so, just a couple of thoughts on the fig tree first. The fig tree is one of the very few trees in Israel that it loses its leaves. Deciduous, right? It's deciduous, right? Not evergreen. And so most everything else there, it's green all the time. These guys actually go bare in the winter and put their leaves on. And if you recall, we talked about the fact that by the time that Jesus had gotten to Jerusalem, that they had leafed out, but they had not put on any fruit yet. So that kind of gives you a sense of the timing there. But he's saying when it does that, then the summer is near. Man, Christine, that was some crazy visuals there that you just gave us. Kind of doing a merry-go-round around the phone or some such thing. That was crazy. So, give me vertigo. But again, this is him challenging them to pay attention to the signs of the times, okay? Not that they need to be just every hour going out and looking at the fig tree, though. They just need to keep an eye out for what's going on around them. And in a very real sense, what he's doing is, if you go back to verse 4, they had asked, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign that when all these things will be fulfilled? And he says, here you go. Remember the fig tree. Keep an eye out. You need to be watching how things develop. But verse 30, and sometimes it's the simple words that get people all stirred up. He says, assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. And that word generation has created a lot of debate among theologians and scholars and writers. And so, as you look at this and you look at the give and take of near and far prophecy, who's he talking about? Who is this generation? Because if you know who, then you know when, right? At least you should. What do you think? And by the way, whatever you pick, I can line up people behind you. Everybody's being coy.
Everybody's waiting for somebody else.
Yeah. Well, here's the reality. It just depends on what your take is on this passage.
I'll be the first to throw out.
Go ahead.
The generation is the church age.
Okay. Heard that. Any reason why you think that's the case?
Well, when most people think of generation, you think of the 20-year span of a generation. But it's not limited to 20 years. It's a broader expanse of population.
Okay. I've certainly heard that position. And you're in good company, by the way. Other thoughts?
I'm pretty solidly in the camp of most, I don't know if most, but many, many, many uses of the Greek word genea, as here are
Yep.
seed, as in from so-and-so's seed or from that plant's seed, meaning this race is usually the way that's translated.
Yeah.
Especially in the context that in most usages Israel is a race and everyone else is an ethnicity. Everyone else, the ethnos is the nations as we translate it. So it's not just a word that's often used this way. It's a word that's often used in a very loaded way. This way, it's very specific to, I mean Israel by this.
Right.
And I mean the covenant, the enduring, unbroken, God's not going to go back on it because he didn't put any conditions on it, covenant to Abraham. It has to be completed, it has to be fulfilled, and God's good to his word. So, and therefore, I will point out that that is a major part of why I lean towards most of the Olivet Discourse referring to Israel rather than the church,
Okay.
because it sums up largely in that point. There are other reasons, but a lot of it comes to that point.
There's plenty to line up behind you on that as well. Anybody else?
Got to be both.
Both what?
It's got to be both near and then far. And that is because it's partly because of Genea. If we extend Brother Chris's generation another 20 years and make that 40 years, which is typically kind of the biblical thinking or grouping of generation, we're looking at the demise of that day's Israel nation. So that's going to be the near prophecy where many of these things occur. But then some of these things don't occur, and that would address kind of Father Dees's point about a bigger and another group.
I mean,
Plenty of people.
there's a parallel to the Exodus with that too, if you think about it that way. The generation of the Exodus
Right.
had to wander in the desert for 40 years so that they would be gone by the time it was time to enter the land.
Very much so.
But then it went well, and then in this period of time, it went less well.
And see that the last 5 minutes tells us why there's a great debate about this word, because there are solid Bible teachers and scholars that will line up all these different ways, right? If you're looking at this and you think, well, Jesus is answering in this particular case, and he's talking about the near destruction of the temple, then yeah, the generation that he's speaking to, that current group of people are going to be alive, right, when the temple is destroyed. You're going to see this. There's a lot of people out there that say, just read the word the way that it's intended, right? But that's where you run into problems, because it's a wide enough word, lexically speaking, that it can mean that group of people living at that moment, that group of people, to your point, Trent, the people who were adults when they crossed the Red Sea, that group of people, that was them. It can mean more specifically that 35-year, 40-year, whatever that is, generation. Or there are those that believe it does mean a much larger, like the church age, as you talked about, Chris. And again, the beauty of it, it's the same that we've talked about before in this Olivet Discourse, is it can mean multiple things and apply correctly depending on whether you're looking near and far, and still be 100% biblically correct, which, right, the biblical prophet cannot be wrong. And so it can be both. And it's funny because scholars, they dig their heels in, and they're like, no, it has to mean this. It has to mean this. And Trent, you made a point with using the Greek word, is that, we're dealing with English translated from Greek that was probably translated from Aramaic to a group of people who were living at a time with a different perception of reality. And what I mean by that is they were raised Jewish, and all that goes with that. And so I think to decide that you're going to die on a hill that has that much linguistic drift is probably a little bit on the arrogant side, quite frankly. Um, and so, not that any guy, I don't think any of you guys are ready to die on your hills, and hopefully not. But it can mean all those things because of what Jesus is trying to say. Um, but what's he mean? What does he mean in verse 31? Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. What does he mean by that? What's he trying to tell them there, very simply?
In the beginning, there was the Word. At the end, the Word still exists.
Well, that's not good. So what's he saying then? What's the pronouncement?
Everything falls away, but the Word, the truth is always the truth.
Okay. Preston says Alpha and Omega. So he's running with you. Yeah, I mean that's it. This creation is temporary. He's eternal. He's eternal. He made it. I brought you into this world. I can take you out. Right. Somebody I can't quote anymore. So
I think there's also a matter of where are you hanging your hope and trust. Because he spent a
indeed.
whole lot of time talking about all the calamities that are to come. To whomever they may happen, it's going to be calamitous. It's going to be scary. It's going to be despairing. It's going to be discouraging. And he's saying, look, this system, heaven and earth the way it is right now, it's going to be gone. It's going to disappear. It's not going to be the way it is anymore at some point, eventually. But I'm going to be the way that I am.
Well, no, you're the one that's always, coming back to this idea of their covenant, their Jewishness, right? And I mean, we know from the Old Testament that they had this idea, well, as long as we've got the temple, as long as we've got the ark, as long as we are Israel, we can't be defeated. We're Israel. And I mean, let's face it, when that temple got destroyed down the road a little bit, I mean that had to be a life-changing, jarring, defeating, despairing thing. But to your point, where are you putting your faith? Is it in this legal system? Is it in this temple? Or is it in me? We got to remember that. All right, with that in mind, we come to the last little section. Of that day and hour, no one knows. Verse 32. Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Take heed, watch and pray, for you do not know when the time is. It is like a man going to a far country, who left his house and gave authority to his servants, and to each his work, and commanded the doorkeeper to watch. Watch therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, in the evening, at midnight, at the crowing of the rooster, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. And what I say to you, I say to all, watch. So, before we get into this, because people have asked, he says, nobody knows the day or the time. Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. So how is it that Jesus could not know the day or hour since he's God? And you think that's a silly question to ask, Bruce. But come on. I this is the kind of thing and I'm not saying any of you are those people, but this is the kind of thing that will derail a Christian when they're talking to somebody about Jesus. And Jesus is God and Jesus is powerful, and they go, well, Jesus didn't know the time that he's coming back. So, or whatever this is that it's talking about. So how's it that Jesus could not know the day or the hour since he's God?
Well, I'll start at the usual retort is centered around willful obedience. And,
Willful obedience?
mhm.
Okay.
And I think this leans a little bit towards moral influence theory too much, but as the example that he's trying to set, he's trying to show so much that he's obedient to the Father as we are supposed to be, that he's just not even going to concern himself with it. So it's a willful disregard for knowledge that some might think is required, partly because that would be like the apple from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Like if you know the plan, then what do you need God for?
Okay, so you see this as him really being an example
I don't.
to his guys. Oh, okay. You don't.
That's a one of the more common, well-reasoned interpretations I've seen out there.
All right.
I think there's an aspect of there are two words in Greek, I guess, writing or philosophy that deal with the word time that we translate as time in both cases.
Opportunity and time, yeah. Kairos and
Eros and Chronos. So we usually think
Right.
of time, Chronos, just the march of time, hours, minutes, and seconds. And here he says no one knows the day or the hour. But so much that God deals with is the other, the Kairos, which is, like you say, the opportune time, but it's the
Right.
fullness of time. It's the allegory I think Aristotle used was it's not just the perfect time to release an arrow to hit a moving target on a battlefield. It also encompasses releasing it with the right amount of strength, and it's the proper path through the air that it has to travel through in order for it all to just perfectly work. And that's
All right.
something that's irrelevant. The point being that concept of time in all of its completeness is kind of irrelevant to our measured passage of Chronos. You can ask what day and what time, and he says, you're asking the wrong question. There's so much more that goes into that you're like, with C.S. Lewis's metaphor, imagine a 3D character came into a 2D world. All they would see is circles and squares and not spheres and cubes. And as much as we could try to explain, no, I'm 3D, I have all this other existence, they would have just no concept of how to deal with that. So we ask something from our four-dimensional existence, and God is something else entirely that it's kind of a dumb question to ask. So he's just not even going to go there with it.
I don't know how to respond to that, so I'm going to just keep going. My initial thought was whether it's opportunity or whether it's hour, he's still God, for goodness sake. So, but then I kind of hear you at the end going, he's not even going to try to broach the subject because they won't get it anyway. I think is what I heard in the midst of all of that.
It's a big part of that.
Okay. All right. Just making sure I was tracking with you on that. Once you got to Aristotle, I just was having shock thinking about philosophy class and I just let it go. So sorry, man. I mean, I had to take all that stuff, but not my favorite time of life. Sorry. Sorry. I'll admit the weakness. I get a shame from Preston, I think. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm sorry that, Trent, Chris, and I are the only guys that are kind of volleying here. I want to get Ruth and John and the peering one down at us in on this, but
Lex Luthor.
Christine's got a very scary countenance, and I'm almost afraid to
The Great
contribute.
Oz.
But and Trent usually refers to this, and I recognize he wasn't going from his own position this week, which is why I didn't throw this out, because I think this is akin to the position that he presented. And this is one I buy, is the kenosis is a very powerful experience that colors the entirety of his mortal life. And so him emptying himself also required him to do something else out of obedience that Trent referenced, and that is to rely on the Holy Spirit for everything that he did. So if it was opportune for him to know, then the Holy Spirit would have permitted that to happen, but it wasn't necessarily so. So that doesn't say that somehow after this conversation, Jesus didn't know. But during the course of this conversation, that wasn't an information piece that the Holy Spirit needed to relay to him because of that emptying out. Yes, he's still fully man, he's still fully God, but his reliance on the Holy Spirit, he's doing the thing that Trent talked about earlier. He's modeling for us how we're supposed to get it done.
Yeah, and I thought that's where Trent was going. He was kind of in that realm as he was reflecting on this other position he doesn't agree with. I tend to be there as well. And you made a pretty important point that at that moment, as he said it, it's not something that was necessary. And this really does speak to where Trent was like, well, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. I don't need to know. It's not need to know information at this point, which maybe that's the instructive part of it. If Jesus as he walked the earth didn't need to know about it, why the heck do we need to know about it? So, but yeah, as soon as he took back up his glory, then of course he knew. He had to know. So I don't think he was veiled for long in an eternal perspective about that. So
I'll say that I won't say that I disagree with, especially when you put it in terms of kenosis. When you take some depth to it, that's one thing. When it's just the shallowest, oh well, he was just being obedient because that's how he wants us to be. That feels dangerous and dismissive to me.
it's a little wooden in the whole perspective of things. Yeah.
Right. Like, there's tons of things that are infinitely beyond our understanding. There are some things that are only moderately beyond our understanding, and we can try a little bit.
Right. I get it.
We can
Yeah.
connect to great example of kenosis passage, which then I think possibly my realist answer, which would take far too long to deal with, and I'm not even sure I would call it fully formed, but it has a lot to do with just the nature of the Trinity. If we could explain it very fully, it would have a lot to do with, well, what's the role of the manifester? And
Right.
to say the manifester, not just the Son, because we could argue by comparison from our own experience. This is why I believe in trichotomy. If Jesus is comparable to our body, we could recognize each other's body and also realize that there's more to a person than that. If we recognize God when we see Jesus, we recognize that there's more to God than that. And so positionally, what I'm getting at is Jesus manifesting on earth the conditions that were set in God's great plan mean that his humanity needed to have a more effective position in this type of knowledge. He needed to speak as a man there rather than as the fullness of God.
Absolutely, because that's where he was. I mean, and as you're making the point, I mean, obedience came into this at this point, and he just his mission didn't require it. And I think Preston made that very important point, is that had he needed the information, the Holy Spirit would have provided it to him, you know, because the Holy Spirit provided really amazing information at odd times. I mean, we talked about Nathaniel a couple of weeks ago, right? That he would see Nathaniel off in a distance because he needed that to be able to interact with that guy. That was the only reason. So
in
yeah.
that regard, it is a model for us.
It is. Oh yeah, it absolutely is.
But I just didn't want to too easily lend to the shortcut idea.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I get it. So kenosis works for me. And you know, you're talking about the triune God. There's a whole lot of drift on the idea of the kenosis as well. What exactly did he empty himself of? And that's but I've always been an advocate of the idea that he was supposed to come here and empty himself of his godly attributes so that he could be led by the Holy Spirit to be a demonstration of how we should do that. I mean, that to me is as tidy as anything gets in that interaction. But as you say, Trent, that's way too involved to get into in our current moment. So we'll leave it there. I think, and I put this in my notes, I think that at this point, Jesus is shifting and talking about the day of the Lord. I mean, I think he's going back and forth I guess I need to tip my hat, because I think he goes back and forth. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's very strictly talking about the temple. Other times I think he's very strictly talking about the day of the Lord. I don't see that when he's in 32 through the back end of this, I think he's very much talking about the day of the Lord. You say, well, you know, no one knew the day that the temple was going to happen either, right? And I can see that, but I believe just the imagery here, and Trent, you mentioned this early on, you know, that because he's talking about the servant and all that sort of thing, this reflects on the day of the Lord and the master returning and that sort of thing. It doesn't really fit with the temple quite in the same way. So he gives 3 instructions about his coming. Take heed. It means to be discerning, to be observant, to be perceptive as to what's going on around. It doesn't mean to be obsessed and trying to pin every current event person into a biblical model. To watch, to stay awake, to be attentive, and then to pray. You know, and it means to actively be praying. For God's direction. And again, not even so come quickly, Lord, being misused. Yes, I know that's at the end of the book of the Revelation. I get that. But to use it as a way to have a get out of jail free card is just not the purpose of that being there. And so this final parable is really an exhortation to watchfulness. And it's interesting that because he's writing to a Roman audience, he uses in verse 35 the 4 Roman watches, and that's talked about a lot if you read through the gospel accounts. The 4 watches of Rome versus the 3 watches that would have been normal for the Jewish people. And so in the evening at midnight, at the crowing of the rooster, and if you live in Kailua where I live, you know that the crowing of the rooster is definitely before morning, sometimes substantially before morning. Don't live next door to them. But did you see at the last verse? And what I say to you, I say to all, watch. And so this is not just restricting this warning to this group of people that are on the Mount of Olives a few days before the crucifixion, but it really is pointing to all of us, So we've kind of talked about this, and the answer to the last question has been poked at, hinted at, and spoken about for the last couple of weeks, I think. But just to kind of pull it all together, something a little more succinct. What does it look like for us to today? What does it look like for us today to obey Jesus' command to be watchful based on what he says in verse 33? What does that look like among the Christian church?
I found a couple things in First and Second Peter that kind of go along with that. It
All
mentions
right.
watchfulness by name. So is it First Peter 4:7? Whoops, lost it. By the end of all things at hand, therefore be serious and watchful in your prayers, and above all things have fervent love for one another. Be hospitable to one another. Each one has received a gift. It goes on for about 17 verses of loving one another. And then in Second Peter 3 says, therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, and elements will melt in fervent heat. Nevertheless, according to his promise, we should look for new heavens and new earth, which is righteous. Therefore, beloved, looking forward to these things, be diligent to be found by him in peace, without spot and blameless. So it seems to be watchfulness involves conscious thought of loving together as the church and not looking forward to fire and brimstone.
Yeah, because right where it's easy to be looking forward to that, and the other part that you had from Peter was to be at peace without spot. There's a sense of, and I think I talked about this. I know I did. I talked about this on Sunday morning in the sermon. That idea of John the Baptist said that he came to baptize with water, but the one coming after him, he's unworthy to loose his sandals. He's going to baptize with the Holy Spirit and fire. And that idea that we're in a time of purification in the church, right? Certainly, sorry, I'm kind of advertising about Sundays, but it just kind of all reflects on what you're saying there, John. The Sunday I'm going to do 1 John 3:16, and that whole idea there is if we truly are of God, we love the brethren, we love the fellowship. And there is that call to, yes, love one another, but that also is a call to purity in the church, purification in the church. If you've got people that are fighting and devouring, there's a good chance they're not followers of Christ. And so that watchfulness really does speak to both of those things that you're talking about. So that's good. I like that. Do you have any more commentary on the verses, or just you're going to leave it there? Any other thoughts?
They stood out just because I was following things specifically on watchfulness.
Okay, that's good. I like those connections. Other thoughts?
I think it's funny that he went straight to Peter, because Peter sure learned a lesson about watchfulness in those watches a couple of days later.
Yes, he did.
Funny that they specifically call out in the Garden of Gethsemane. They got there right after sunset because they just finished dinner. Prayed for 3 hours until midnight, when they kept falling asleep and not praying, not being watchful in your prayers.
That's it.
And then he went and denied him when the rooster crowed.
Yeah. Sure did.
And then they were on their way by morning. So Peter learned that one pretty hard. As for
Sure did.
as for what it looks like for us, well, we have the Great Commission and the greatest commandment. We have the fruit of the Spirit is. We have, if I gain the whole world and have not love, I'm a sounding brass and a clanging gong. We have countless admonitions toward exactly what you're saying, what Peter was saying, what Paul says, what Jesus said, over and over and over again. It's love Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
Go to the nations. The
That's it.
the project at the end is that every nation, tribe, and tongue will kneel, and every tongue shall confess. So get started.
That's it. We got a lot of work to do. All right, I'm hearing a theme. Any other thoughts? What's it look like for us to obey Jesus' command to be watchful?
Well, a lot of love from John's passages that he picked up, and Trent is on the love theme too. Love your neighbor, love the Lord your God, right? So let's not confuse love with the warm fuzzy emotion. Let's let's consider defining it as an action and a behavior term as opposed to a really warm feeling in the middle of my Valentine on my chest.
I was so waiting for you when you said consider. I thought we might go there.
No, yes, there's elements there, and John's all over it, and Trent's touching it. You just preached about it a couple weeks ago, at least mentioned it. You can do it. I'm done with that. Go
But it's
ahead.
right there, right? Consider one another,
It
stir up
is.
love and good works,
Yep,
not
it is.
forsaking the gathering together as
It
the
is.
habit of some, but the more so as the
As the
day
day I
approaches.
approach it. I,
Yeah, it's right there. But your point is well made because love is such a mealy mouthed thing in our world today, to the point that you've got absolutely abjectly lost people going, love wins. It's like you have no, lust wins for you. Yeah, that whole thing. But I actually used that in one of the pictures for this thing recently because I liked it. But yeah, that just gets lame as opposed to the reality that love is tough sometimes. Love is very tough sometimes. To be able to say to a brother or sister in Christ, man, I'm not throwing you under the bus. I am judging you. I'm doing it with holy judgment, but I want to do the Galatians 6 stuff with you, right? I mean, I want to come alongside you as a spiritual person and help you through this, right? Yeah.
Well, along those lines, this kind of started, depending on how you divide it up, with "My words will not pass away."
Yeah.
You get the Old Testament prophecy that no longer will they teach each other because my word will be written on their hearts. And that's way off at the end, the distant future. What happens in between? All scripture is God breathed.
Right.
Usually stop there, but it goes on to say it's profitable for doctrine, for reproof, and for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God might be mature and thoroughly furnished to all good works. Or equipped, yeah.
Mhm.
So, yes, written to Timothy as a pastor, and it's usually taken, this is the pastoral role, and the man of God is the pastor who's equipped. I think that's all of us.
It is.
Pastor is but one among many who has an office to attend to towards the building up of the entire church, the exhortation and the reproof, and the instruction in righteousness, because righteousness is what we're after. Not that we're going to attain it for ourselves, we're going to receive it, and this is how.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about that. But, again, you look at that to be at peace without spot. I mean, there is a sense of the righteousness of God, becoming a priority in the body of Christ. So we've got to be there.
And
All
so
good
we talk
things.
about watchfulness. That's a constant attentiveness. It's not just the role of the pastor to be attentive to
Indeed.
that procedure. It's everyone's responsibility. Attend to yourself and attend to your neighbor and attend to your community, your gathering, your church.
Yeah, that was my kind of my read when I mentioned Galatians 6, I think it's 1 through 5. If a man is overtaken in a trespass, you are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness, so forth and so on. And the only way that lots of times, well, I'm not going to preach the passage, but suffice it to say, oftentimes we observe a brother or sister that's overtaken in a trespass. We've got to be keeping our eyes out for them. So, all right, that's good. I'm really liking that kind of where that all went there, because again, it's not let's start figuring out whether George Bush or Barack Obama or Donald Trump or Joe Biden or the Antichrist or not. That's not the answer. never has been the answer. It's about us binding together, banding together, bringing more into the fellowship, and working toward the Great Commission and the Great Commandment all at the same time. Very good. Very, very good.